Now on the screen, I see you in big and I see me in small. How do I see me in big? On the right side, more. I see the audio delayed. Oh, okay. Okay, I made myself big. Okay, so now I see myself in big. Perfect. Beautiful. Let me pick up my chair a little bit. All right. Perfect. Okay, so where's what's his name?
Yeah, music.
Who is this?
Yeah.
Muting myself. Was I muted before?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay, I see iPhone, I see LS, I see Mendel Harwitz connecting. Oh, that's my grandson. Oh, I see it. Okay, we are live on YouTube. We have people joining us as we speak. And it's 2 minutes to go. 2 minutes till showtime. Okay, yes, David. Thank God, good. Let's make sure I have to mute myself one second. Okay, I just spoke to David. He'll be on in a second. And there we go. I see David. I think you got it just came on, right?
Yes, I don't actually see. Oh, there you go. Hello, how are you?
Great, Baruch Hashem.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you perfectly. And Izzy, you ready?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay, let's just give it another minute or two. It's exactly 8 o'clock. 2 minutes for people to just get on, and then we should start pretty quick, promptly.
We took another warehouse to do our food distributions because Baruch Hashem, we had tremendous demand. And so we had one of our volunteers as an artist, and she came in and she did this graffiti logo for us.
It's amazing. I was wondering about it.
Yeah.
Really pretty. Met Council Kosher Food Network. This is a special
That's right.
just for the Food Network.
Well, it's out of our Greenpoint warehouse where we're doing our distributions for seniors. We're doing around 6,000 to 7,000 a week.
Wow, wow, wow. And as you know, we just put in our order with you for the Rosh Hashanah distribution. I'm sure you're keeping track, and we're very excited about the partnership with you and distributing food.
Rabbi Cohen, I can't hear you so clearly. Can you hear me well or no?
I hear you perfectly. I wonder why. I mean, my volume is good, I think.
Ellie, do you hear me good?
I hear you well also. Is my
Perfect.
voice not clear?
I hear you, Izzy. I don't hear Rabbi Cohen so well, and I see Shmuley is walking somewhere.
I'm just wondering, this is usually a good connection. I don't know why. Maybe because of the streaming on you.
I hear you perfectly fine, interestingly enough.
Oh, okay. So,
no problem.
So hopefully people will too.
The thing is, some questions are going to be addressed to both of you. You might have to hear each other.
Okay, no problem. Do you hear me now?
I hear you perfectly the whole time. No problem at all.
David, did you hear him? Okay, 30-second countdown. Are you ready?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, I just wanted to welcome everybody to tonight's forum. Tonight's going to be about the state of affairs politically in Crown Heights, but also for the broader Jewish community. We're all watching the tumult of the huge 2020 election and Congress and Senate and the whole world turning upside down and the Postal Service. But I wanted to discuss tonight, this is an event that we had in the making for a very long time. We want to discuss things here locally in Crown Heights, politically, and also in the broader Jewish community. Tonight's evening is brought to the public by COL Live. I just wanted to thank the directors, owners of COL, Yossi and Mika Sofer, for making this platform available to the masses. I'm going to go straight to tonight's panelists. We're very honored to have with us tonight. I'm going to go by order of age. We have Rabbi Eli Cohen, the Executive Director of the Crown Heights Jewish Community Council, born and raised in Manchester, England. For 18 years at the beginning of his career, from 1985 through 2003, Rabbi Cohen served as Director of Chabad at NYU University, building a vibrant Jewish communal and religious life on the NYU campus and providing spiritual guidance to the students, faculty, and staff. Our other panelist tonight is David G. Greenfield. Doesn't need much introduction. David is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Met Council, which I'm adding in a little flavor. The Met Council is doing miracle work now. There is millions and millions of pounds of food distribution going on around the entire New York City that David's involved. David is an accomplished legislator, popular law professor, and noted media personality with a broad experience in government and non-for-profit organizations. As CEO, David has expanded Met's council mission and services to help over 250,000 people in New York through multiple and direct services and policy advocacy. In his 8 years in city council, David authored nearly 30 pieces of legislation that were signed into law by Mayors Michael Bloomberg and Mayor Bill de Blasio. David passed historic legislation mandating affordable housing, reforming the landmark preservation process, and providing free security guards for over 100,000 private school children. So as a father of children in the local schools, I want to thank you. I never gave you thank you for that. Prior to serving on the city council, David was executive vice president of the Sephardic Jewish Community Federation. Greenfield also teaches the next generation of lawyers at adjunct professor of law at Brooklyn Law School. He's a proud lifelong resident of Brooklyn, where he happily lives with his wife and children. Moderating tonight's event is yours truly, Izzy from Izzy Rant Incorporated, myself, who is founder and director of a show in Crown Heights, and is a proud father to 2 children and my wife living here in Brooklyn. I feel very honored to be a moderator for tonight's event. And when they asked me, I said the reason why I agreed is because I get phone calls all day long, people asking me who has a good moving truck company. I have friends fleeing to Pennsylvania, Texas, Florida. I even got a call if I want to move to the UAE now that there's a new peace coalition going on with Israel and the UAE. Probably Chabad opening up over there, but I'm going to be staying here. I'm here to stay here in Brooklyn, and my kids are all registered to yeshivas this coming September. So I feel like I want to be involved in what's going on in the community. I'm going to start off tonight's question addressed to Councilman Greenfield. The last few months, I don't know about everybody, which district zoning you're in, but the last couple of months, every time I went to shul, I was stopped by popular guys like Avremi Levin or Avi Leshes or a lot of other people in the community, and they were saying, this is our opportunity. This past election was our opportunity to get somebody from our community into Congress. Congress election for District 9, a lot of us were backing Chaim Deutsch. I know David Greenfield was a big advocate. He came to speak at a shul down the block from me. I was out of town that night, but I heard there was a big attendance. There was a big showing at the event. I want to address this councilman and Council Greenfield. What happened in that election?
Well, I think, the first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me. It's really a thrill to be here, and I appreciate the forum, and I appreciate you, and I'm very grateful so much for the Crown Heights Jewish Community Council and the leadership of Rabbi Cohen and the great work, and obviously the website that's sponsoring. I'm a big fan and a reader on a consistent basis. I would say that the most important thing, I think, really to understand in the entire context is that our community has tremendous power, but we don't use the power, right? And so if you think about what happens, essentially is we have literally hundreds of thousands of people who are concentrated in very specific neighborhoods. So Crown Heights, Borough Park, Flatbush, Williamsburg, that should give us the ability to impact elections. It's very simple. If every person in the community actually registered and showed up and voted, we would run the table. The reality is that we're not participating, and that's why we're losing elections. It's really not that complicated. It's like saying there's a great deal on a house, the house is for sale for $100,000, then you show up with $50,000 and you wonder why you didn't get the house. The answer is if you would have showed up with $100,000, you would have bought the house. And that's exactly what's happening over here. We have the resources, we're just not utilizing those resources, and that's why we keep losing again and again and again.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question, David, because you mentioned something. They told us all that in the primary, whoever's going to win the Democratic Party for District 9 in Congress is automatically going to win the election because we're a very democratic state. And that we had a tremendous amount of votes that were promised to us in Brighton Beach, in parts of Flatbush, in Kensington, parts of Brooklyn, that we were able to pull it off. I looked at the numbers today on Wikipedia. They might be off by a couple of numbers. And they said Chaim Deutsch got around 8,900 to 9,100 votes based on different way of counting, about 9,000 votes. And Yvette Clark got way over 40,000 votes. I just want to know going forward where I'm going to put effort, or people watching are going to put effort into future elections. Although on paper, we might be able to pull it off, but when she got 5 times the amount of votes, even during COVID, is this a new eye-opening that there are a lot of people that do vote in primaries?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually why primaries. So I just want to minor clarification on one point, Izzy, which is that New York City is overwhelmingly Democratic, right? If you leave New York City, there are actually locations where a Republican could win. But we're focused on the city over here, where most of the Frum community lives. And if you focus on New York City, the reality is that it is virtually impossible, except for a couple of neighborhoods, I would say in places like Staten Island or maybe one neighborhood in Queens, for a Republican to win. And that's exactly why the Democratic primary actually is so attractive. And I go back to my example of buying a house for $100,000, right? There's an auction and the house is available for $100,000. Now, normally a house is not available for $100,000, right? You have to spend $500,000 or $750,000 or $1 million. But if you show up at the auction and you only have $50,000, then you try to bid, you're not going to win the house. It's the same thing over here. Democratic primaries are traditionally lower turnouts. And so what happens is, for a community like ours, this is where we can organize and we can actually make an outsized impact. And the one thing I will point out is that it's a little bit frustrating, because for a community that's very good at doing everything, right? We can, you mentioned the United Arab Emirates and Dubai. There's now kosher food and minyanim in those locations, right? Everybody has a backyard minyan during COVID. We couldn't find 5 minutes to vote. It's very frustrating, and there's really no excuse.
I want to have continuing this conversation. I wanted to ask Ellie Cohen. The morning of the election, I went to vote on Empire Boulevard, and I did not see a big turnout at all. It was very, very, very slow turnout, which, just on the record, I didn't see any Lubavitchers or Jewish people voting. A couple of people from the community, the non-Jewish community, were actually voting. But when I got back home, a lot of people called me. My phone was ringing off the hook that they're hearing stories that in parts of Flatbush, certain candidates weren't on the ballot and that they weren't registered to vote. Did you have it was on all the Jewish websites. It was a huge headline banner flashing that there's corruption going on. And later on, I spoke to people in the world of politics, and they said that it was all false alarms. Do you know a little bit about what's going on, what happened with that election, with that particular election?
Well, I really, the information that I got was more from Crown Heights, and it does not look like there was a big failure from the point of view of the polling. There was one place where special arrangements were made for people because of religious considerations, and that was not held to on the election day. That was a problem. Most of the problems turned out because people were coming and saying, I'm registered to vote, and it turned out that they were not registered as Democrats. So this was a Democratic primary. People who were not registered as Democrats don't get a vote. So if you're an independent, you're a Republican, you didn't have a ballot over there for that election. So that was, I think, the more common problem. The other problem that was a failure by the authorities was that a lot of people, because of fear of getting sick, especially more vulnerable, that they had requested absentee ballots, and the ballots did not get to them on time. So some people were calling me and saying, my ballot didn't arrive yet, what can I do? And they were not willing to go to the polling station because they were still, isolating. So so from the point of view of the system, I don't see corruption as being a thing. We had, in different elections, we did have reports, for example, of somebody in one of the polling stations telling people that you must vote down the line and you're not allowed to split your vote between different parties. That did happen at another election, but I didn't hear of that kind of thing this time around. And I think, like I said, some people who really screamed loud, they got a affidavit ballot, which means it's a ballot you put in an envelope and they open it later after they check your validity. But that's only if they were, that's only if they're Democratic, registered as Democrats, then they get the vote. Otherwise.
Okay, the next question is, Ellie started touching on it a little bit. I'm going to address this question to Councilman Greenfield. A lot of people tell me, I want to register as a Republican. My politics lean towards Donald Trump and the Republican Party. The Democratic Party left the Jewish community in the 60s or 70s. It's already, they don't really address our issues as much as the Republicans. And I want to be able to vote in the Republican primary. And then when I was growing up, everybody I met in yeshiva and older siblings, they said, you got to be crazy to be a registered Democrat in New York City. Like you just said, that Councilman Greenfield said that in New York City, not the state of New York, maybe I misspoke, but in New York City, we do lean a lot towards the left, overwhelmingly, and you see who wins elections. So people are saying that we should, the Rabbanim and the Askanim and the Yeshivas have to start telling all the high school boys and girls that they have to register as Democrats. This way they're able to vote in primaries, because I wanted to just add on what Ellie just said, that somebody told me that a lot of the people that said that they weren't being given ballots and they got absentee ballots and sworn affidavits was major ignorance. It was people that really registered 10 or 20 years ago as independents or Republicans showing up to the Democratic primary thinking it was the election that they could try to push in Chaim Deutsch. And that's where a lot of the ignorance comes from. So I wanted to ask Councilman Greenfield, how large is the ignorance in the local Hasidic Jewish community? And obviously, you're not going to tell people on the record what they should do. It's freedom at the ballot box. But would you say that there should be a huge push from Rabbanim and Askanim that people in our communities, the 5 boroughs, should all register as Democrats by default?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation about this. And I think that part of the frustration is that people don't understand that the national politics is very different than the local politics. And what that means is, honestly, that nationally, it certainly could be argued that I think that a lot of people, because of the national issues, in some cases lean towards Republican within the Orthodox community. But those issues are not being decided on a local level, right? So for example, when it comes to an issue such as religious freedom, those are federal constitutional issues, right? So you might say, well, on the national level, I lean towards supporting candidates or judges who are more inclined to rule a certain way. But on local issues, for example, when it comes to local judgeships, you want somebody who actually, for example, might actually care about law and order and crime and issues like that. And so what happens on the local level really is, if you're not engaged within the Democratic Party, and I'm saying this on my off time, right, which is, if you're not engaged within the Democratic Party, you're ceding the party to the very far left. And so what happens is people then get upset and they say, well, why has the Democratic Party in New York gone so left wing? And the answer is because you're not involved, right? It's kind of like in your shul, right? If they serve cholent that's very bland and you don't care to throw some spices in there, you're going to end up with bland cholent every Shabbos. You can't complain. You should show up before Shabbos and you should throw some spices in there so you have cholent that's a little bit more tasty than bland cholent. I imagine you don't have this problem in Chabad Lubavitch, but by us,
not in my shul. My shul has the best cholent in the world. Rabbi Shmuel has the best cholent in the world.
I'll tell you why, Izzy, because somebody puts in spices before Shabbos. That's why.
The best.
Great.
So with all the frustration, I'll just give you another example. We had another candidate that was very, very friendly towards the Jewish community, Jesse Hamilton. And we had such good influence with him. We were so close to the community for a good decade or two. I always remember him always being involved in all the major events that happened in the local Jewish community. And he started voting and syndicating himself with a little bit towards the right wing, with the Republicans voting on a lot of good topics that we were leaning towards. And the Democratic Party came out as such a mob that they voted him out. When he was the incumbent, they brought new people to the ballot box that never, ever, ever voted. And elections that had small turnouts, because a candidate veered a little bit towards the right, it wasn't, all of a sudden they got voted out. So now a lot of local candidates are even more nervous or more scared to even lean a drop towards the right of the left wing candidacy in the Democratic Party today. So a lot of candidates, people are saying, if you try to get them onto legislation or onto a lot of right wing causes or things that lean towards the Jewish community, you're just going to alienate them, and they're going to see a whole bunch of local politicians that have costed them their seats. Like, are you familiar with the Jesse Hamilton situation?
So Izzy, if you think about it, you're kind of actually proving my point, right? Because think about what happens over there. What happens is that you as a community say, we have certain issues that we care about, right? But the problem is that you won't back up those candidates with your votes. So politics is like any other business, right? People want to be successful in their business. If you sell pizza, you want people to buy pizza. And if people aren't buying your pizza, you're going to change the recipe. It's the same exact thing. And honestly, I'm always surprised that people don't really understand this, which is that so long as you're supporting the pizza shop is going to keep the recipe intact. What happens actually is, when you don't go to the pizza shop, you can't blame them for changing the recipe. So you're upset at elected officials who are changing their policies but you're not voting for those elected officials. And by the way, let's be honest, the reality is that it's pretty easy to vote. Voting is a process that takes literally 5 minutes. And this year, everybody could have done it by mail. We're talking about people that go to great lengths. We go to great lengths for our matzahs, for our lulavim, for our esrogim, for our shofar. I've seen people pick out the right shofar for Rosh Hashanah. Don't tell me that everybody in the community can't vote. If the community supported these candidates, just like we support our pizza shops, then the candidates would stay in office and the pizza shops would stay open. But you can't have a taina on the pizza shop that goes out of business when the community doesn't support them. So the taina is really on us that we don't support these officials.
I wanted Barry Cohen to weigh in a little bit on this, on the last question.
Okay, so one thing I want to weigh in just for a second, and I know David will agree with me because he's working on this also. There's another issue that's important in the same vein of just having our numbers count, and that is the census. If you know, we are still, the official census date is April 1, but we're still being counted until the end of September. As of right now, 50% of the Jewish households in Crown Heights have not registered for the census yet. And this is another example of just not, the less we are counted, the less we'll count when it comes to future elections. I'm going to put up on the screen for 1 second our census ad, if I can. Let's see if that works. Boom. Miracle. No, it didn't, because I got a few different things at once. I'm going to try and make that one bigger. Hold on. Oh, I have to go back. Sorry. So quickly, it's the one on the right, but I have to unshare my screen. It didn't quite work the way I wanted. But anyway, go on to, I know, I can do it a different way. I'm going to share the different ad of the census. My census 2020.gov is the website. And please today, make sure that every single person in your household is counted in the census. It's very important, and it will make a massive difference. Do you agree with that, David? So it's mycensus2020.gov. Take a second. I'm going to put it in the chat for those who can chat. mycensus2020.gov. It takes 5 minutes. If you can just put in your address, and you will get immediately to your own house or apartment, and make sure to put in every single person who lives in your apartment. And if you have a basement somewhere, you can, and with people living there, you can just put them in also. If you know their name and their age, you don't need the date of birth, put them in and make sure that the entire community gets counted, because the less are counted here, the more our votes are diluted by other neighborhoods.
So while you're saying it's Rabbi Cohen, like at least 7 or 8 people message me. If you could just quickly, in a nutshell, explain why it's so important that every single person fills out the census card. Just a big, sharp, clear to the point. People didn't understand that.
What kind of life is this?
Yeah, so the census counts every single person in America. All the voting districts are split up according to the census. Let's say, for example, a assembly district right here, the one you were talking about that we just had an election for, has 100,000 people in it. So if there are 50,000 Jews registered in Crown Heights, members of the Hasidic community, then there'll only be another 50,000 votes to counter that in that district. If we only get 30,000 people counted, then there'll be 70 to 30. So the weight of our vote will change according to making sure people are counted. So that's why it's so important. Number one. Number two, your school buses, your school lunches, so many things that the welfare for poor people in the neighborhood, food stamps, all of these things are allocated according to healthcare, all allocated according to the census. So the more we're counted, the more that our community will benefit from those resources, and that's true.
I'm gonna go away from voting for a moment. I'm gonna get back to it soon. There's plenty more questions about that, but I wanted to just diverge for a moment to bring up something that came to my attention. David Greenfield tweeted today at around 10 hours ago that shootings are up 81%, murders are up in New York City 31% this year. We know that crime is rampant. Crime in New York City is rampant. People are fleeing, and crime is definitely one of the big reasons. I know already that part of your answer is going to be you didn't vote in the right people, and that's why crime is crazy, because you're giving that answer for a lot of questions. But the people in New York City want to know, number one, are we safe? Number two, you sat as a New York City council member for 8 years, and you're involved now even more in the community with everything that you're doing with your organizations. It's a double-edged question. Number one is, are we safe? And number two is, besides in the future ballot box, we're going to get back to voting questions soon. What could people today in New York City, when every time you put on 770 or 1010, you hear about another shooting, another stabbing, another burglary? I was busy prepping for tonight's conversation. I heard that there was a massive robbery today on 13th Avenue, broad daylight. The criminals are not scared anymore. They're totally, it's a walk in the park to rob a bank today. So I'm addressing this to Mr. Greenfield, who has a lot of experience, decades of experience in this. And my question again is, should we feel safe? Obviously, some people aren't going to feel safe. And what measures could we take today? Not at the ballot box for mayor or district attorney, but today, what are things that the people here sitting in Marine Park, Borough Park, Crown Heights, Williamsburg, Flatbush, Kensington, what they could do today?
Sure. So look, the big picture question in terms of are we safe, I would say that we still are safe, right? You can have two things be true, right? You could have a guy who is worth $10 million and he lost $1 million and he's still a millionaire, right? So you're asking, are we still safe? And the answer is yes, we're still safe, just like somebody who had 10 million who lost $1 million, who's still a millionaire. Are we less safe? The answer is sure, we're less safe, right? Just like the person who had 10 million who lost $1 million is less rich, right? So I still think that we are still a safe city. The metrics overall are still solid, but I think we should all be concerned, just like if you were a millionaire and you lost $1 million, you should be worried about what the future holds. So that was really my point, was to flag for people that this is serious because crimes have gone up and it has real life consequences. I think the kinds of thing, nobody likes to talk about, obviously, the politics, but the politics over here is, I think people should be speaking up about how important it is to them that the streets are safe in New York. There's a value to that, right? Which is, and by the way, I want to give Rabbi Eli Cohen a lot of credit for this, because every meeting I've been with him in the last couple of years, when he meets with officials, police officials, government officials, he always says, it's important for us to keep Crown Heights safe. That has to be a priority, just like there are other political priorities. People need to know that that's a priority. And if people hear from people who live in New York that safety is important to us, the elected officials will be responsive, even not at the ballot box, because that's what the public cares about, and that's what has to be communicated.
Thank you so much. Rabbi Cohen, do you mind weighing in on this for a moment?
Yeah, so I will say this. First of all, yes, you're right, absolutely right. We have been clamoring, hammering. I almost fell out with one of my with my two state elected officials over the issue of, because I wouldn't let them go to another subject when we had a meeting. Maybe they're listening and they'll laugh a little. But Albany made some terrible decisions about the way that accused people are being let out, even if they're committing quite violent crimes. Not the most violent, they can be held and remanded or bailed, but many crimes that people are being let straight back onto the streets, including having guns and so on. And I think it's actually time for the governor. Maybe we should be talking to the governor. If you could have executive orders to stop people getting sick and dying from that, maybe there should be an executive order that anybody caught with a gun in New York City should immediately be held until trial. And that would be as an emergency power, because we're seeing, there were 2 shootings in Lincoln Terrace Park in the last month, and there were about 12 altogether in Greater Crown Heights. So in the last 3 months. So we're talking about massive numbers of shootings, and kids are going around with guns, and I think it's an emergency situation. So we should be making that noise. And the truth is, though.
But 1 sec. Thank you. We're gonna. That's the next question. The next question I wanted to address to Mr. Greenfield, Councilman Greenfield, everybody in the world all day long is talking about how bail reform in New York City is out of control. Murderers, rapists, grand theft, everything you could imagine, people are being let out of jail within an hour or two. Now, I understand that a lot of cash bail reform had to be changed and overturned because there were people that didn't have $900, so they sat in Rikers Island for a year. You know, that's very unconstitutional. I'm not a lawyer. You are a lawyer by trade, a fine lawyer, a popular lawyer. But we see what happened in the last couple of months since the bail reform law went into practice, how there is so much crime and so many crazy things happening in the community. What could be done today? Again, not in the ballot box, but first of all, could you give a background to the people that are going to be watching it now live and over the next few weeks? I'm sure it's going to be a very, very popular conversation. People are going to be discussing from a legislative point of view and from a legal point of view, how did it even happen? Were people in the community sleeping at the wheel for years that they didn't warn us what's going to happen? Because most people woke up when it went into law and when we see the terrible repercussions of the bail reform law. Even the president tweets about it all the time. So I wanted to ask Mr. Greenfield, particularly because you're a lawyer and particularly because you were on the city council, how did the law happen and how could we quickly have it reversed?
I think you know, nothing happens overnight, right? So I think that everything is a process, right? And I think that what we've seen happen here in New York City, a lot of it has to do with really a perfect storm. Some of this obviously is that the NYPD has been curtailed in terms of some of their traditional work that they've been able to do. Others is that you've seen the funding has gone down for a lot of programs, not just the NYPD as well. Others have to do with the fact that there is historic levels of unemployment. I think there's also historic levels of frustration. And I think finally, and I think this is really the last two pieces of it, is that people don't trust government anymore, which I think is a big problem.
Can I interrupt for a second? The question is, how did such a terrible piece of legislation where people commit violent, heinous crimes and they're back on the street 1 hour later, not only are they back on the street 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours later, they are able to ask the courts within a day or two. I read something in the newspapers, I think it was the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, that within a day or two, they know everything about their victim. They're like the lawyer now. They're able to, during trial, you could ask for a summation and you're able to get all the, the laws, you're able to ask. So now they're able to go knock on their victim's door and say, oh, I want to look at the place of the effect because I'm going to be representing myself in court. That people now are intimidated to even call the police because if somebody's arrested for a violent crime against them, they're on the street an hour later and they know everything about their victim. So it's even scarier. A piece of legislation like that was voted on, put into law, and the people in New York City and the people keep messaging me now to ask you how such a thing went into law when the average New Yorker knew nothing about it happening until it was already passed.
Got it. I thought, Izzy, I thought you were asking, I'm sorry, I thought you were asking about how we got to the situation in terms of crime. So I didn't hear that. I didn't hear the question so clear. That's the question I was responding to. I would say in terms of how legislation gets passed, the answer is that there's two things. The first thing is you have to understand is that there are interest groups, right? The reality is that there are groups that are up in Albany that represent different communities and constituencies that fight for different issues. And one of the groups that fights in Albany are folks that are looking to reform issues. And they also jump on together with other groups that have different agendas. And that's how legislation gets done. So when you're not represented in the halls of Albany, both internally and externally, that's how you end up with legislation where your community is not heard. That's the first thing. The second thing I will say, which I think is important, and by the way, I apologize because I'm gonna lose you soon, so I'm gonna have to hop off in 5 minutes. But I do want to say the second thing, which is important, is that just so people understand, is that a lot of times things have good intentions and they have bad consequences, right? And part of leadership is understanding and saying, look, that wasn't exactly what we intended, right? So there were a lot of people who signed on to legislation because understandably, there actually has been frustration when you did hear stories, which there are stories of people, even within the Frum community, people get arrested. They spend nights, weeks, in some cases, months or years in jail unjustly. People get upset and they say, we want to reform that. And that's fair. But sometimes what happens when these reforms are, when they come into practice, they end up having unintended consequences. So I think you have a combination of two things. First is the community is not represented very well politically in Albany. And Izzy, you hate for me to say this, but it goes back to my original point, which is because you don't vote, because you don't elect your people, no one's fighting for you. That's Aleph. But Bays, which is equally important, is real leadership is recognizing and saying, look, we messed up. It went too far and we need to fix it. And unfortunately, we live in a time and an age where it's very difficult for people to admit they make mistakes, because when they do, the media really aggressively, of course, not this website, but the media tends to aggressively criticize them. And so people tend to try to simply say, no, whatever I did was okay. And I think that's a combination of those two factors that you have, which is one is very strong advocacy and no pushback. And the second is that a lack of leadership that people don't want to admit when they make mistakes.
Thank you so much.
I'll just add into that. I think that you're right about that, by the way. And I think after this, we'll go on to other things other than crime. But I think that in the case of the bail reform, I think the mistake here was that everyone was saying reverse it, and the groups that were concerned for civil rights didn't want to reverse it. So I think the message has to be that it has to be improved, not completely reversed. So for example, to include more categories of crime where you give the gun possession or burglary or assault, certain areas where they should have allowed judges to hold people who are obviously dangerous, and that was not done.
Okay.
So it can be done without completely changing it.
Thank you so much. Before I lose the councilman, I wanted to ask another question, because people have very short-term memories. Mayor Bill de Blasio still has about another year in office, so he's not going anywhere too quickly. I do believe he's an intelligent man. People could call him names, and I do not believe he has an ounce of anti-Semitism in him. But some of the things that happen in New York City, I really ask myself, what is going on? I don't know about how things were in Borough Park, but here in Crown Heights, a couple of weeks ago, for 3 weeks straight, nobody slept. I'm talking about 20 to 22 days where from 7 p.m. till 4 a.m., every 14 seconds were loud firecrackers. And it wasn't like people were hiding. I went to Mincha one Shabbos. It was at the height of the summer. Mincha was like 8:15. I went to Mincha around 8 o'clock. I'm walking down the streets. You see people opening up 15-passenger vans and distributing big boxes of fireworks. And they were exploding everywhere. And I believe that if the mayor was the mayor trying to show everybody, if I want, I can have the place be dangerous? It's a broad accusation I'm making. And the police, people were saying the police could have stopped it, but the police were saying, everybody's talking about defunding the police. Well, look what's going to happen. So for me, being a simple guy raising a family, I'm like, the police, I kept calling the police and they kept saying we can't do anything about it. And they're blaming the mayor's office. The mayor's office says he's not sure what the story is, although all the newspapers said that there was a 4,000% increase in fireworks from the year before. It looked like the police and the mayor's office were both basically telling the people of New York City, we have you hostage. If any of us don't want to do our jobs, you guys are in big trouble. I mean, please convince me otherwise or explain me what really happened. After 3 weeks, the mayor said at a press conference that he's fully aware of it and he was briefed on it and that he's sending in the police. And within 24 hours, it was over, which means to say he is quite powerful. He was able to end it in 2 seconds. So what took 3 weeks of people not sleeping at night, children being terrified and horrified? I mean, I could go on for an hour telling you about how horrific it was. I want to know if the councilman could weigh in a little bit on what really was happening behind the scenes.
Look, Izzy, I appreciate the last question, and I'll leave you with this because I think it's a very interesting point that you make. And I would say that less than 1% of doctors end up becoming surgeons. And it's very interesting when you think about that, right? Because every doctor you ever meet is a very, very smart guy. They're very smart. They're very talented. And to get into medical school, to finish medical school, to take the boards, to actually get certified as a physician really requires tremendous talents. And really, it's a limited class of people. But even within that class of people, only 1% of those people, those best and the brightest, end up being surgeons. And why is that? The answer is because it's the pressure. It's very difficult to understand how people react under pressure. And that's what I think you've seen from the mayor. I think the mayor's a good guy. I think the mayor means well. I definitely do not believe the mayor's anti-Semitic. I think that the mayor has buckled under the pressure of a tremendously difficult situation where the economy has faltered, where people have lost their jobs, where people have died and gotten sick, where there's criminal justice issue, where there are protests in the street, where businesses are shut down. And I think, unfortunately, he hasn't been able to live up to that. And the problem basically is this, that when you're dealing with doctors and there's residencies and there's tests, you can test people in a very low profile environment where you can be an intern and someone can judge you, oh, are you going to be a good surgeon or not? The problem is that when you're in a public official, you never know until an emergency if somebody will step up. And unfortunately, I think that the pressure was a little bit too much for him to handle.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate you. Have a
Okay,
great
if
night.
it's a
you,
show,
David.
if it's a show, we'll do this more often. We'll have you on again. It's
Looking
really an
forward.
honor to have you on. And
I hope we don't lose the
audience.
audience now that we're losing our superstar.
No. I just wanted to say one thing. I wanted to say something about David Greenfield. About 10 years ago, me and 3 local shows in Crown Heights had a lot of questions about shows and how to manage non-for-profits and a lot of other questions. And we called him to meet with a few local shows. And he came and he gave 2 hours of his time. And he was very, very helpful and influential and very, very thankful.
Really my pleasure. Yep, I do. I remember it.
Shop?
I remember it. You look the same. I've aged, Baruch Hashem. Thank you guys. I appreciate you. Take care. Bye.
All right,
Thank
be
you
well.
so much. Have a good night, and thank you for all your work at the Met Council.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to continue for the next quarter of an hour, 20 minutes with the executive director of Rabbi Eli Cohen. Just for the people now that are around in Crown Heights, we're going to discuss some of the more local community issues. I wanted to ask Rabbi Cohen to explain a little bit about what goes on in the Jewish Community Council here in Crown Heights and about some of the services we offer here to the residents and what goes on a daily basis and how people could get maybe more active.
Right. Okay. Before I do that, though, I do want, just because we were talking so much about how important it is, we were talking about the elections, and again, you need to register to vote. Every single person. If you have a driver's license or a New York State ID card, you can just take that card. You can go onto the New York State DMV site. They have registered to vote over there. You just put in your information from the front and the back of your card, and they will send you, you will be registered automatically. So please do that. Make sure every single child who's 18 and over should register to vote in your family. As your kids become even 17, when they get their driver's license, they can already register. And if you don't have a driver's license or a driver's ID, or you're from out of state, make sure to get a paper registration form from our office on Kingston Avenue, 387 Kingston Avenue, and you can register to vote so that we don't leave it till the last minute before the next election. And the big election is not the presidential election, which is massive, by the way, even though, maybe our votes won't be in the majority, but it might be. It's very important. Numbers count. When people see how many people go out to vote, that's very important. So please take the time to vote in November 3rd. And also, but the big election is going to be what you were talking about, Izzy, is what's going to happen next year when we're going to have the city council and the mayoral election, because we see that it makes a big difference in New York City who is running the show. And a lot of things have happened that maybe, certainly from the mayor, we could have hoped for better. And I think that we need to make sure we pick the right person next time around. So now we'll talk about the council. So Crown Heights Jewish Community Council, it's been around exactly 1969 was when it was founded. It was founded at a time when the Rebbe made a big push to stay in Crown Heights. There was a lot of civil unrest, very similar to what's going on now, maybe in some ways worse. And many people were from there was a massive Jewish neighborhood at that time. And then many people ran and left the neighborhood because of violence and because of unrest. And the Rebbe said that we're not going to run away, we're going to stay and build. And at that time, several Hasidim got together and formed the Jewish Community Council. And the idea was to make a possibility for the Jewish community to grow and thrive in the neighborhood and to care for the whole neighborhood and for all people in Crown Heights. And sure enough, it was tremendously successful in many, many ways. We see that the community at that time was a few hundred people. Now it's, who knows, 4, 5, 6,000 families, 4, 5, 6,000 households, I should say, living in the neighborhood, depending how you count it. Minimum 4, maximum 6, and about 28,000 Jews living in Crown Heights, according to the last Jewish community study. So that's a lot of people, and it's a lot of power, as we said. Now, what does the council itself do? The council, its main function is to help bring government funds into the neighborhood. So we're the one charity that doesn't depend on people to support it. Any money that we raise only goes directly to helping people, because the basic costs of the council are paid for by the programs that we provide. So in other words, someone comes into the council and they need to apply for Medicaid or food stamps, or they call it SNAP today, or if they have an immigration question, we do free green card applications. So many people don't realize that. If a senior has an issue with Social Security or a half-price transit card, we have people in the office who will help them free of charge, and the costs of those programs are borne by the government. Of course, we help everybody, Jewish, non-Jewish, black, white, green, yellow, whatever color, all religions. There's no discrimination. We also have a nice food pantry, which has been expanded now because of COVID. We're serving several hundred people a week on Schenectady, just below the alley between Montgomery and Crown, and anyone is welcome to over the call first to make an appointment if it's better, but if you can just show up on a Wednesday and get free food, and many, many other different services. We also, interestingly enough, we are involved in a few programs that people don't know about. For example, we do weatherization, which means that we provide insulation and new windows sometimes, and new boilers and other measures to make houses be more comfortable and more efficient, and also buildings. And we've been doing that for many years. And we have a crime victims program, which helps people who have been victimized by crime under certain circumstances. If there's injuries or loss of work, to someone who was injured, they can get compensation from the state, and we help people with that. And we also are involved in helping building owners get rid of lead out of their apartments. So many, many, many different things that we do to bring services to the community and bring jobs and funding into the community. We also, together with JCC of Greater Coney Island, and also in a program led by Yeshua Wordy of who's also known for his great work with young entrepreneurs, we also are involved in helping people find jobs and apply for jobs. And that's a very successful program that's run together with JCC of Greater Coney Island and the Borough Park JCC. That's just a few things.
Right. Another question I wanted to address to Councilman, but he's not here, but I'm sure this is something that you get a lot of questions about. When you turn on the news today, the only thing you hear about the last 48 hours is about mail-in voting. I'm sure people coming to the community council that have asked for a mail-in vote because they're scared to go to the polling station because of COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. What's your general understanding? Maybe you understand it a little better than most people. And what do you tell people that call you up and ask you about mail-in ballots? Are they safe? Are they tampered with? Are they even counted? People say that usually in a regular election, mail-in ballots are like a last-minute thing, and they're really, you got to go down to really have your vote counted. Are you familiar with the topic?
Yeah, so there's a few different things here that are important to know. First of all, in the last election, the one that just was, we definitely did encourage people to do mail-in voting because of the safety issue. And it was a mixed bag because, first of all, you have to be very, very careful to do it right. So if you didn't sign the outside envelope, then your ballot was discarded. If it arrived late, for the mailing, and some of those were only mailed on the day of the election. If it arrived late, or if it got a postmark with tomorrow's date, it was not counted. So there are many reasons why, if you don't do it exactly right, your vote will be disqualified. So that's the number one thing. The second thing with the mail-in voting is that a lot of people requested it and didn't get it. So then they had no choice but to go out anyway. These days, it's definitely the most accurate way to get your vote counted is to go down in person and do it. Now, these days, they have a new system called early voting, where often on election day, there are long lines, and you can go a little further to the early voting site for your neighborhood, and you can get, get your vote, do your vote a day or two before without having to wait in line usually. Those early voting sites are not usually very busy. So, look, mail-in voting is definitely valid. It definitely works if it's done right. What they're talking about in other states that the Republicans are very upset about is a few states where they mail a real ballot, not an application, but an actual ballot to everybody, and then they're worried that those will get lost. There have been videos recently that there may be markings on the outside of the envelopes that somebody might know which are the Republican and which are the.
I wanted to ask you, that was a follow-up question.
Yeah. So I saw this.
Somebody sent me a WhatsApp video yesterday where somebody was showing, but today with Snopes and fake media and you don't know what's going on, that in the states that everybody automatically gets in, not that you request, but you automatically get it in, somewhere on the back of the envelope, there's an R or a D, where if it's Republican or Democrat, and obviously people are saying that the anti-Trumpers are going to take the R ballot, for you're probably going to vote Republican and they're going to toss them out. Is that a joke or it's a real thing?
I don't know about it, but I don't think it applies to New York, but it's an interesting thought. Like you said, it's we have to investigate to see who, what the fact checkers say on that one. But as far as the main problem, I think in New York is that, and anywhere, is that if you don't do it right, in other words, if you don't take the ballot and put it in the envelope and seal it and fill out the outside envelope with the information they asked for and sign it, the main thing is the signature, because they have to check the signature against the voting rolls before they open the envelope and take out your actual ballot. So if you don't do it right, you're going to lose your vote. So that's a problem. And the other problem in relying on it is if it doesn't arrive on time, or if there's a problem with the mail. So even, everyone in Crown Heights has mailed out invitations. It's not a new thing that happened this week or this month, and everyone knows that 50% of the invitations not delivered. So hopefully it's better when it comes to ballots, but who knows? So in person is always best.
Right. On a lighter topic, we did the majority was about politics, and I actually started off the forum that we're going to discuss elections and politics. So hopefully at a future date, we'll be able to discuss other topics. I'm just going to veer it off a little bit.
Okay.
A lot of people are messaging me, though I looked down a few times on my phone. People were asking that does the Gedalia Society and the Rabbanim and Dr. Rosen are all working very closely from a medical point of view. The Crown Heights Jewish Community Council, I'm sure you guys also meet with professionals and speak. Does the Community Council have like an official message or an official response to people asking what's going to be with all the tens of thousands of Tishrei Arachim that come to the community? I mean, we know that the governor said that they're going to have on certain highways, if people are coming in from out of state or a JFK or LaGuardia, they might give them a card that says you should isolate yourself. But people that are Archim that are coming for Tishrei, you and I both know they're not isolating for 14 days, because then they could just stay home if they're isolating for 14 days. And, we're in a democracy and there's a constitution and they're not going to ban people. But does the Community Council have an official say on, are we welcoming the tens of thousands of Archim? Especially right now, as we're speaking, they're talking about 4 popular Lubavitch bungalow colonies upstate. People came from out of town and came there, and now people are being infected again. Are you familiar with the topic, or is this something that people should be alarmed on? Because I saw articles on some of the websites, but I still haven't heard an opinion from anybody in the community leadership role.
Right. Well, look, I think that the Gedalia Society with the doctors and the Rabbanim have been doing a phenomenal job. I think adding an extra voice just confuses things more. So we've stayed to the side on this one. They've been very on top of it. They've had bulletins every few days, letting people know what to do. The official request from the community is not to come for Tishrei. that's the official request from the Rabbanim and the Gedalia Society, unless you meet those conditions that they mentioned over there. And as far as the yeshiva bachrim who are coming for a full year, I understand that there are being proper arrangements being made for them to quarantine at the beginning, and also women students too. So that most of the yeshivas and schools are working together with the medical and rabbinic professionals, and I should not be giving any personal opinions, I don't think.
Right. Taking the matters even more closely into the community. Rabbi Shvei was a big loss to the community during COVID. Rabbi Groner was a huge loss to the community. Does the community council or it's the Rabbanim, was there ever talk from the community council about potentially being an election to replace Rabbi Shvei? I mean, it's going to be very difficult to replace such a chashuv Rav that we all love so much. But is that something that the community council is involved with, or it's only the Rabbanim that deal with it? Or I'm just curious. I've never been able to vote in an election for Rabbanim because I wasn't married or of age. I'm just wondering how these things usually work because you're involved. Right.
So there is absolutely. I mean, that is the system. Is there should be an election. Not only are we due for an election for to fill the seat of a new Rav, but also I'm just muting somebody. That's why I'm just taking a second looking down. So not only are we overdue for the election for the Rav, but we're also about 7 or 8 years overdue for election for Vadakol, which is the officers of the community council and the Vadakol. So in other words, my bosses, and that election is quite overdue. Well, nobody's holding it back. Also,
can we do mail-in ballots for Vadakol and Rabbanim?
I don't think so. I think it'll be an in-person ballot. I would love to see it happen soon. I think everybody on the Vadakol and the board of the JCC also recognizes that it's time for it to happen. And it's really just a question of there being a sort of a momentum to make it happen. So a few times we did send out notices asking people to start the process, setting election schedules. Several times over the last, I think at least 3 times over the last 6 or 7 years, those messages have gone out, and there hasn't been a massive response. It really needs a few people to take it under their, in their hands to just help make it happen, because it's not it was always done by volunteers. The tzigim were the representatives of the shuls, and they had a committee for many years that handled that, and either that group could reassemble itself, or else just a group of volunteers would be empowered to make it happen. And I'm sure the Rabbanim would endorse that if the people came forward who wanted to make it happen, and it will happen. And it should happen, because that's the system that was been in place for many years. So there's nothing missing except just the momentum to make it go.
Right. So I want to just, before we close up, I wanted to just say that I think what I took out of the last hour, which it's a full 360, is that everybody has to register to vote. And it's not only about the November 3rd election, which is important, but on a more local level where things are going to actually make a difference, every single person has to make sure that they're registered, and everybody in their family that's going to be 18 by the mayoral, more local election in 2021 is registered.
Right. You should be aware, by the way, that in the last 2 city council elections, so our city council member is a very close friend. Well, we actually have 4 city council members who represent Crown Heights, and they're all close friends. Alika Ampry Samuel, Matthew Eugene, Robert Cornegie, and the one who covers most of Crown Heights is Lori Cumbo. And there's no question about it, in both elections when she was elected, both 3 years ago and 7 years ago, the Jewish vote was the deciding vote. So in other words, even though on our own we could have not elected somebody, but by being the swing vote that made the difference, you're talking about maybe 8,000 to 5,000, and the couple of thousand votes from the Jewish community made the difference. So there's no question that we can and will make a difference. And we shouldn't say, okay, in the bigger elections, like for, well, you never know. By the way, 2 years ago, when Yvette Clark was elected the previous time, and she is a friend of the community, Sometimes we have a little bumpy ride with her and some things, but basically she is very responsive to us and has been a good friend. And I must mention that in the prior election, she only just squeaked in, and I think maybe the Jewish folk could have carried her in at that time.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to shout out to Ellie Slavin, who's the right-hand man of Yvette Clark. And I'm not going into all the votes that ever have to do with Israel, but on a community level, if somebody needs the ear of the Congresswoman, Ellie's usually there to help everybody.
Yeah, he's wonderful. And by the way, let's not, if we're already talking about the important people to mention, we shouldn't forget Hanina Sperlin, who works day and night to advocate for the community at every level of government. He has everybody's cell number, and and the one thing, sometimes you have somebody who's a macher, an activist, but all he wants to do is get his picture taken or to just make nice smiles. Hanina is not like that. Every single picture that is taken is an opportunity for him to advocate for the community. If it's to help people find jobs, if it's to take care of personal issues that people need attention to, if it's communal issues, if it's schools, if it's shuls, if it's mikvahs, whatever it is that is needed in the community, Hanina will always go right to the person and make sure that the issue is taken care of. I mean, I have two pictures of him with the mayor's really demanding and asking why it wasn't taken care of to get rid of the no parking Saturday on Eastern Parkway, which was, so Hanina is amazing, and I continue to be amazed by him.
So together with registering, everybody has to be registered, and my recommendation is if you want to have a real say in local elections, to register as a Democrat, that you could vote in Democratic primaries, which are usually going to be the people that are ultimately going to be on the ballot, and also to make sure to fill out the census card.
Right, so the census is online. You must do it right away. We only have till a couple of weeks left, so do it right away and make sure that we get those numbers up. mycensus2020.gov. mycensus2020.gov is the link for the census. If you didn't do it now. Do it still while you're upstate. You can do it. It doesn't know where you're doing it from. If you're in your summer house, do it from there, and make sure to be counted in the census. And then, in the next breath, while you're still on the computer, go onto the DMV site and sign up yourself, your children, your bacha who's away in yeshiva, may be back at the next election, your daughter who's away in seminary, not now, but is going away soon. Let her sign up before she leaves, and let's make sure that we have a massive registration between now and the general election.
I just wanted to mention that maybe in the future we could have on people that want to run for Varakol or Rabban, and we could have a discussion, and we could have we'll take a lot of questions from the audiences that people could feel more involved. Mirza Shev should happen, in a very timely fashion. But again, these are things that are above my pay grade.
All right. If anyone wants to volunteer to run the election, email me, ecohen@chjcc.org, and if we get enough people together and and we can make it happen, we'll do it. So it's an open invitation. And also, by the way, if you're one of those people who say, well, what does the Crown Heights Jewish Community Council do for me anyway? And why don't we do this? And why don't we do that? The answer is we belong to the people. If you think there's something that should be done, come and help us do it, make us do it, because we're here for you. And we really belong to the people. If you get involved, even if you don't want to run for Varakol or for the board of the CHJC, but you just want to be on a committee to take care of something, whatever it is, be in touch and help out, because we are here for you. We have no interest except the interest of the community, and we're here to serve the community, and we belong to the community. So that's an open invitation.
I just wanted to say thank you so much again to David Greenfield and to Ellie Cohen for being here tonight for the first of hopefully many state of affairs in Crown Heights politically. And hopefully next time we'll be able to discuss a lot more topics. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning on. And again, thank you so much, COL, for broadcasting this live and helping the community be aware of what's going on. Thank you so much, and have a great evening. And like the Rebbe always says, after Tu B'Av, you start wishing people a Kshuva v'Achsiva Tova, L'shana Tova Masukah.
Amen. L'shana Tova Masukah to you too.
Kol Tov.